All right, moving on to a very interesting report that Nomura has put out, in which they have assessed that by the end of 2021, 50% of all Indian adults will be vaccinated, as opposed to the goal/promise that it will be 100% of all Indians. Co-author of that report is with me right now, Dr. Aurodeep Nandi. He's, of course, Indian economist and Vice President at Nomura. Dr. Aurodeep, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Can you first start by telling us about the key highlights of this report and why you have come to this assessment that we will be done with 50% vaccinations at our current rate?
Good evening, Tamanna. So essentially what we've tried to do is sort of look at what kind of vaccine pipeline we have vis-a-vis different manufacturers coming up with their doses, and what does that translate to in terms of actually the inoculation taking place. Now, as you're aware, a couple of days back, we hit a record of around 8.6 million vaccines per day. So essentially, the motivation of this report was to figure out, hey, we've achieved this on one particular day. What does this mean for the rest of the year? Now, over the past 3 days, what we've seen is that the average pace has moderated to around 6 million doses per day. Even so, that's pretty high. From last week, most of June, we've seen around 3 million doses per day. So 6 million doses per day is still double of that, even if it's not 8.6 million. Now, so far, the July supply has surprised us. If India continues to maintain 6 million per day for the next 5 days, then for the whole month, you're looking at around 120 million doses. That's higher than what we had assumed at 90 million. Now, the question is then, well, what happens next, right? So in July, the government is hoping for SII and Bharat Biotech, so your Covishield and Covaxin doses to start picking up. Our estimate is that possibly July is going to be the transition month, right? July is the point where we may not yet be able to reach 8 million dose per day kind of record, but something around the zone of around 5 million doses per day seems realistic. But August is really our vaccine pivot, because you've got the enhanced capacities of SII and Bharat Biotech coming in, you've got Sputnik coming in, you've got Zycov-D, you've got Pfizer starting to join the pipeline, and then you're looking at a sort of a monthly dosage of around 250 million. And 250 million in a month is close to 8 million per day. You're able to maintain that target. So essentially, we've sort of taken this into account. We've also taken into account the fact that, hey, look, all of this is being front-loaded for the first doses, right? So these first doses are eventually going to get their second doses. All put together, I mean, our simulations, and look, I mean, these are simulations, these are based on news reports, but our simulations show that 50% of the population should be vaccinated by the end of this year.
Yeah, and all of us possibly by March 2022. So, Aurodeep, very quickly, what happens then? What happens to economic activity if you have 50% of the population vaccinated? Here, we are barely out of the second wave, and third wave fears have begun. This Delta Plus variant is scaring everyone. Let's just take the example of Maharashtra. There are 20 cases so far detected, but the entire state has gone into level 3. So everything that had opened in level 2, level 1 districts, shops, shopping centers, multiplexes, etc., shut down again. So what does a 50% coverage of all adults give us in terms of economic activity in your view?
So Tamanna, the way to think about economic activity during a lockdown is a little bit like when we were kids, we would have these cars with springs. So we'd take it back and then we just leave it and it shoots ahead. That's what happens when an economy exits out of a lockdown, right? So there's a kind of revenge mobility that comes up. People get out to malls, restaurants, etc., and that brings back some of the momentum in the economy. Now, one of the things that we've observed over the course of May and now June is that the biggest hit to the economy seems to have happened in May. And in June, things look to be sequentially better. Overall, I mean, for FY22, we have in fact an above market consensus call for 10.4% growth in the Indian economy for FY22. And part of that is that an assumption that the worst hit happens in May and happens in the second quarter, April to June of the calendar year. And then you see some of this pivot come in, right? So that's why vaccines are so important, because, you know, once people start moving around, there is a greater risk of virus spread. As you rightly said, Maharashtra is again in this phase. People are still talking about third wave now. And the whole bet is that once you have a vaccine pivot, once you have people more and more vaccinated, people can move around without spreading the virus. Now, that's sort of the hope that one brings in. So from a growth perspective, you've got the vaccine pivot come in. We are in a year of very strong global growth at around 6.3%. This is blockbuster levels of global growth. We have pretty easy financial conditions, so interest-sensitive sectors should do well. And let's not forget, the government is looking to front-load its fiscal activism.
Yes.
So we are going to have more spending on capex. Once we put all of this together, we are relatively optimistic on growth. But again, as you rightly said, the big risk is a third wave, Delta variant, and unfortunately, economists and even epidemiologists would have no idea how that's going to pan out. So that's sort of the negative risk to our growth outlook.
No, nobody has any clue. Nobody has any clue. It's best not to speculate on what is happening next. What we do know for sure is we need to mask up, be careful, and not take it for granted. I mean, just today, for example, Israel, fastest nation to vaccinate a majority of their population, has had to reverse its policy against indoor masking. They had removed indoor masking. Now they have asked everyone to mask up again because of new variants, the Delta variant, ruining their plans. So let's keep the masks on. That's the only thing we know for sure. Thank you so much, Aurodeep, for joining us on the show this evening.